I recently got diagnosed with both being dyslexia and ADHD. A multitude and personal issues, so there's a lot of demand at any given point in time, and I felt that to be able to revise without any hindrances is hard for any person, but then when you're a working woman with family and all the other commitments, it's a lot harder. Before I started GP training, I was a core medical trainee, so when you come from a hospital background, it's very different. We don't get taught the communication side of things, so you have to sometimes, which I realised myself, is that unpick some of the bad habits that you've picked up along the way, not realise you were doing it at the time. This is it, I have no more to give if God forbid it doesn't happen. A whole month of waiting was quite torturous, and even on the day of the exam results, I didn't quite believe it. I had to look at it 3 times to make sure that it did repass, because I wasn't expecting it to.
What does it take to overcome exam anxiety, juggle family life, and still manage to achieve a pass in the SCA exam? Today you're going to meet Dr. Sunita Reddy, a GP trainee who passed SCA on her first attempt with an amazing score of 87. This is her journey from doubt to success and how she made it happen despite dyslexia and ADHD. Hi Sunita, welcome to the channel. Congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on.
For people who might not know you, take us through the journey. How was Sunita, who actually started her preparation before the SCA?
Certainly. So I'm Dr Sunita Reddy, and I'm a GPST 3 in the northwest area. And so in terms of my journey, I did the AKT in the April of last year. I was kind of planning to do the SCA in September. That was my initial planning. Started looking at what to do, and so I looked at the website, the LCGP website, and I felt a bit lost. And it wasn't that there was already a few sittings had already taken place, so there was other trainees that had already done this, and I was expecting a bit more in terms of guidance, and I still felt like I was one of the first few, even though I wasn't at that point, because obviously this was just in May when I got the results. So I was like looking for various different resources out there, and I didn't know whether to go back and use the books like the Emily Bart book and just use that to which I know has been tried and tested and has worked for others. So I kind of was a bit haphazard in some ways, and then I'd come across yourself and a few other different resources, and it's actually some of the videos that you've released in the past have actually drawn me in, and it was some of the explanations that others have said, this is what's worked for me, and I've those that sometimes have failed the exam beforehand, where I wasn't in that position, thankfully, but I was quite apprehensive. I'm not what you call a typical international medical graduate, but in some respects I am, because I did train abroad in India, but I'm born and bred in the UK, so I feel like I'm in I can't quite call myself an international medical graduate, but at the same time I'm not homebred either, so I'm in that limbo state. So I didn't know where to go, and it was through listening to some of the other people that I was like, oh, actually this probably might do me well, I might look into this. So I initially looked at your blueprint resource, and that's what really helped me, because I found that there was a bit of structure there, and I was like, okay, I could maybe use this.
So when you're going through the exam preparation, I remember at the time it was quite overwhelming. What was a little voice in your head saying to yourself?
It was going 10 to the mile. There was all sorts going through my mind, and hearing others people's stories, which sometimes can be beneficial, but also a bit of a hindrance if you struggle like myself. I think I've diagnosed myself as having imposter syndrome, and anxiety was at the peaks for me. I've always had it, but not to that extent. And I don't know if it's because obviously we know that a lot is riding on the exam itself, because it's your exit exam in some ways. So I think I was putting undue pressure on myself, which actually is a hindrance for me personally. Some people thrive on that, pressured environment, and they will go on to do it. But for me, I found that it wasn't. I was actually, which I didn't realise at the time, that it was actually being counterproductive for me, and I needed something to calm me down, and I needed structure. That has always been the case for me. I need to know where I'm going, what I'm doing. And what didn't help in some ways is that there's no actual mark scheme as such that is easily available to say, right, these are the things that you kind of expected from you. So you don't know where to pitch yourself in some ways.
Yeah, so there was quite a lot of uncertainty and self-doubt. What would you say was hardest part of this journey, knowing that you're also a mom and having to juggle family life?
Outside of work, in terms of being a GP, I've got a multitude of things that take my time up, which was the other hindrance in some ways. So I needed to be able to have quality time when I'm able to sit and revise, I need to get the most out of it. So I'm a mum of 2 girls, and I also help in the family business. and then obviously being a GP. And to help or not help, I recently got diagnosed with both being dyslexia and ADHD. So there was a multitude of personal issues. So there was a lot of demand at any given point in time, and I felt that to be able to revise without any hindrance is hard for any person. But then when you're a working woman with family and all the other commitments, it's a lot harder.
So you mentioned the ADHD and dyslexia was another thing that came up. So how did you process that?
In all honesty, I think I'm still processing it in some ways, and I think I'm now only finally accepting. So my initial point, if I go back a little bit in the sense that it had taken me a while to understand and accept these diagnoses, and when I started to do that, I then realised actually there's a lot of help and resources out there as a GP trainee. I know it varies from deanery to deanery, but locally I've been well supported. And when I applied, so as part of the exam process, if you do have further requirements, then the LCGP will support you. So as long as you do it in advance notice, because by the time I'd got my diagnosis, I had all that in place. So I applied, and I was actually given some extra time for reading, which I did find that quite helpful.
Tell us about the preparation then. How did you find clarity in your preparation?
In all honesty, I didn't have clarity until I actually met and started to use resources, because then I was like, okay, this is going to work for me. And the biggest thing in terms of the program is using the blueprint. So every time I was practicing, whether at home, at work, with friends, I was making a note of what I was doing and what happened, or if there was a certain phrases that I even if I wasn't the doctor or acted as a patient, I was just an observer, because sometimes it would just be only 3 of us, sometimes only 2 of us, but whichever situation, I'd make a note of the things that I liked or did not like, and we would, or picking up on phrases or gestures that you might not necessarily know about yourself that you're doing, not being aware, and actually watching others, or when they're doing it, thinking, oh yeah, that looked good, but then actually this bit didn't, and having that log of journey, and then just towards the exam, being able to flick through all that and saying, yes, no, this is good, right, okay, I've got to make sure I don't do this. And every so often, because I had about a good 2-3 months where I was able to use that, so I was checking in myself, and every month at the end saying, okay, I've practiced all these cases good and well, but how much of it actually am I taking on board?
Yeah, so I found that the people in the program who use the SCA companion have managed to track their progress and make so much progress in their preparation rather than just working hard doing cases one after the other. So tell us about your way of using it then. Was there anything that you found more helpful than like just tracking the progress?
So it was so I'd always go into each session thinking, okay, today, right at the beginning, because I was able to do that because of the time I was having, was that each time for the first few months, I was focusing on the first 6 minutes and making sure I got the right data gathering involved. So I would go in doing that and saying, okay, did I achieve my agenda today? And if I didn't, why was it? Was it because I was preoccupied? And sometimes it was because I had other things on my mind. And that taught me something as well, because it's going to happen in real life. You might have a bad day, you've gone to work, you're doing a full clinic, but if you're preoccupied, you're not really going to be listening, you're not going to be attentive. And so it's taught me to be quite introspective, which we do as general physicians, but sometimes we need to be a bit more in tune with what we're doing and how our outside life will impact on the work, and inverse the other way around as well, because sometimes we do bring our work home just by the nature of the job we do.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and finding out more about how you consult, knowing yourself, and that self-awareness is so important. So, can you give us an example of a blind spot that you managed to identify and how you fix it, Sunita?
Yes, so I was semi-aware of it, but I didn't realize how big of a problem it is, and I'm probably doing it now subconsciously, is that when I'm trying to explain something, I talk a lot to describe the same thing when it could be just done in 3 words. And that was something that when we were doing one-to-ones, that was the first thing that it picked up, and it was good in some ways. Even though I was slightly aware of it, I didn't realize how big of a problem it was, and actually how hindering it would be, especially when I was going to the end of that 6 minutes, when I'm coming in to explain a diagnosis or a management plan. And I think that's where, if I hadn't done the program, I would have failed quite awfully, because that's where the crux of the marks is, and being able to condense it in such a way.
Yeah, time is of essence in the exam. So if you don't manage your time well, that's where you can rush in the management and don't have a good plan. So tell us, how did you structure your consultation?
So I broke it down. So the first minute, I just let the patient do the talking, gather what and if I take a step back, actually, it was priming the cases. So when the patient's scenario is played out, or you get a bit of information, I'd be asking myself what kind of things might come up. And actually, it helped calm my mind down. And as I say, my mind generally tends to run 10 to a dozen, and it's that plan of action that really helped. Even if the actor, or even in real life, the situation isn't as I'm planned, I've planned it out in my head, even if it's going off, I still feel like I'm in control. I know what's going, or what I'm going to go, where this could go, because I've kind of planned out a few different options. So just a random example, I suppose, would be a geriatric case. It's someone's had a fall. So thinking about, is it medicines, what's, are they delirious, they have got infection. So having that plan, checking out the home circumstances, the impact of that fall. Do they have that social support? Do they need to go into hospital? So having that vague plan in my head, so that as the story evolves and the patient's divulging that information, I've already got a plan in my head where I'm going to take this.
I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah, priming the case is so important. When you're anticipating all these contingency scenarios, then you're in a better position to manage it when it presents itself. So you were anticipating, you're thinking through and doing that groundwork even before the consultation had started. Then tell us about the next step then.
So once I plan the case, I go in, let them do that first minute of divulging what they want to do, and trying to get their icing really early as well. That's something that I hadn't done on my own, and that's something that I picked up that was really important. And I even now continue to do that. And it helps, again, because you're not time wasting, because time management was one of the other big things, not just the second part of the consultation for me, but even in the beginning, knowing where to target my questions when I get to the closed questions after hearing all the the open-ended bits. And I felt out before going, and I was quite good in getting that first bit, but it was that closing it down nicely, so you've ruled out the major 2 or 3 things that you want to rule out in terms of red flags. You don't necessarily need to ask all the red flags, but you've got to make sure it's a safe consultation. In order to do that, which few reds are you going to definitely ask? And getting that, and then moving on to the social aspect. Sometimes it would not, and again, it's not having a rigid structure as such, but having a structure, because sometimes the patient will tell you in that first opening gambit that, oh, well, this person that is at home, or I'm stressed at work, rather than waiting to ask about work at the end, because you've already mentioned it. Why don't you just say, oh, you mentioned work there, where do you work? Because that means that you're listening, so it's showing immediately that you're paying attention to what they're saying, rather than 3 minutes down the line, like, oh yeah, you mentioned work earlier, and you're like, well, you missed your opportunity.
Yeah, so responding to the cues instantly and uncovering it is going to be really helpful in progressing it in a way that allows the conversation to flow. So you managed to get the data gathering within the time frame you want, and then how do you bridge data gathering to clinical management?
So by saying, so you've mentioned all these things. There's a couple of things that are playing on my mind of what could be. I'm bringing it back to the expectation. So saying, well, this is what I was, I have got a couple of minds. I know you said earlier it was this. I'm bringing the E back in to with your conclusion, saying this is what you thought, but actually this is what I was thinking. Or actually, no, I agree with what you were thinking. This is that, and this is how we propose to, and it's that we approach. It's not, I am going to send you to the hospital. It's that I suspect that we need to get you seen. What's your thoughts about that? We do need to get someone, a specialist to look at you, ideally straight away.
That's great. So you achieve shared understanding where you're involving the patient in the discussion rather than trying to make the decision for the patient. So that's really good, because that's where many IMGs struggle with.
And even, like I say, even I was struggling initially, and it took some practice to get to that comfortable level. And looking back, it was hard doing it whilst you were doing it, because you're consciously having to undo some of your own. So before I started GP training, I was a core medical trainee. So when you come from in a hospital background, it's very different. We don't get taught the communication side of things. So you have to sometimes which I realised on myself, is that unpick some of the bad habits that you've picked up along the way and not realise you were doing it at the time. So having to kind of backtrack a little bit and then learn the right ways, I suppose, to approaching it and being very patient-centric.
Was there a moment when you felt, right, I've got it now?
I'd say very close to the exam, but even then, because I don't know, again, with the nerves in general and my anxiety, as I say, is always on a high level. But I was ready, and I remember going into the day of the exam thinking, I'm done. This is it. I haven't got any more to give. And it's very rare I've gone into an exam in that frame of mind that this is it. I have no more to give if God forbid it doesn't happen. And even on the day of the exam, day after, and that whole month of waiting was quite torturous. And even on the day of the exam results, I didn't quite believe it. I had to look at it 3 times to make sure that it did read past, because I wasn't expecting it to. Because even on the day of the exams, some of the consultations I had, despite me saying all this, I still didn't finish the consultation in time. There's a few things, but what helped was, when going back to the bit about conclusion, how did I move on? I learned, for me, what worked was kind of highlighting the main things I kind of want to talk about and then opening about each one. And that was a personal way of me trying to combat my time management, so that it was a bit of an exam technique, I suppose, in some ways. In real life, I've done it sometimes, but not all the time. I choose where I do that. But highlighting, these are the 4 things I want to talk about as part of our, conversation moving forward. And I think that what did help in terms of getting those marks, even though I didn't finish on time and I was cut mid-conversation in some of them. And that was some of the feedback actually that I got, that one in particular, that it didn't finish time management, but I didn't fail that station, which I thought I would, because I didn't finish it. And looking back, it's probably because I'd highlighted the things I wanted to talk about.
Great, yeah. So sometimes you might be thinking, I might fail this, but then you're surprised when the station went well. How would you like to have a playbook that over 200 GP trainees have used to pass SCA exam? If you'd like to download the free copy of the SCA blueprint, click the link down in the description and you get the free copy, and I'll also give you daily teaching for the next 7 days. Click the link and you get it for free. How did it feel to know that not only did you pass, but you passed with a score of 87? What does that mean to you?
Looking back now, I guess I've always been really good with interpersonal skills, and I wasn't necessarily worried even going into the exam. But it's not just having the gift of talking or the communication, but it's how you utilize that. And for me, all I wanted was just to pass. And in all honesty, when I looked at the results, I didn't quite believe that it was that score. And I think it was because of that hard work and preparation and the lead up and that preparation, knowing where to focus for me individually, but as a whole, because my structure before going into the exam was a bit haphazard. When I was doing my data gathering, I was a bit all over the place. And when I started to kind of unpick it, I then became very rigid. And I was doing worse than when I first started. I found that quite hard to grapple with. And I was like, hang on, I'm spending hours here trying to revise. Why am I performing worse now than I was at the beginning of when I started this journey? So when I was doing my COTS with my supervisor, I was doing really well. And then as I was starting to practice, my COTS quality had come down and it didn't quite understand. And this was now, nearing the end, and I've always had good feedback, and it was starting to dip. And I was like, why? And that journey log actually helped, because I realized it was because I was unpicking at each bit. So sometimes the other bits were falling apart, but that's because I was starting from the top and working my way through.
That's very interesting. So yeah, in this journey, you will have so many parts of it where you feel like you're not making that progress. And if you follow a proven strategy and you document what you're doing, then it all click, as you said, in the end and nearing the exam. So what would you say to somebody who's been watching up until now and thinking, I'm not good enough, I don't think I can pass? What would you say to that person?
I think it's having a winning mindset, and it's crazy as it sounds. And I was not a believer before I started, even with the AKT and even with the SE, is that you've got to want it, and you've got to be prepared to put in the hard work. We got, which we all will do regardless. But it's, I think, saying no, I am going to see that pass mark on that day, and I did, and I really honestly did envisage that. But despite all that, my anxiety was still saying, no, you're going to fail. But I was like, no, I'm not letting that ugly head rear its face. I'm like, no, I've not got no space for you. I am going to pass. I've done everything that I should do. There's not much more for me to give than this. And it's seeing that and telling yourself you're doing the work, continue to do what you're doing, put it in the graft.
Yeah. So that mindset is so important. And if you don't tell yourself that you can pass, then you're going to find evidence that you can't pass. So what was it like to manage the exam anxiety at its peak? And sometimes I've noticed people, they don't sleep well before the exam, the night before.
Well, the lead up to it was quite awful. I mean, I've always struggled with insomnia, so it doesn't go without saying. And I think I mean, for me, what worked was just going out for a walk just after work, literally put the car on the drive and literally go around the block once just to get a bit of fresh air because it breaks the day up a bit. I'm having to squeeze it in any other way. I didn't have any other room or place to do that. But it's having a plan. I'm a planny person. I need to do a list and saying I've got this much time. And that's the other thing, was saying that if I, on the days that I couldn't do anything, I was still able to do something, because I'd tell myself, okay, I can't sit and practice with somebody because it means that I need 24 minutes at least for them to do, well, more than 24 minutes, nearly 45 minutes to do 2 cases and be able to debrief with each other. So on those days when I couldn't do anything, I would just get the book out and read. So I was reading for myself the Emily Bart book, and making notes of phrases or things or questions that, oh yes, no, this, in this scenario, I need to be asking these things. And that was the other thing. So on the Bradford VTS website, there is, and that's where I picked it up from, but then I've developed it a bit further. So, and this was part of me because I struggle with being concise, is writing red flags and 1 or 2 sentences to describe a disease, so that it was within that 40 seconds. So I was trying to get myself to be to the point, and making that document for myself. So on the days that I wasn't practicing with others, I would spend time doing that.
That's great. So you manage your time very well to know what are the things you would do depending on the work and how you feel at the time as well. So what do you think the biggest difference the coaching give you?
It was the guidance. It was that accountability, saying, right, saying by next time we meet, these are the things I'm going to work on. And then being able to say, well, actually, no, sorry, I didn't quite do that, but I've done this, and having someone else other than your supervisor looking at them, because sometimes, because they're used to your way of style of things, they're like, yeah, no, I know you meant that. And it kind of gets, not that they don't know it, but they're kind of like, it's fine. But on the exam, you can have multitude of examiners looking at you, and they might not get your way of thinking, and therefore you'll fail.
If you could go back and speak to the Sunita 6 months ago, who was quite stressed about exam, what would you say to Sunita then if you had a piece of advice?
Believe in yourself. Take one day at a time. Because it can be so overwhelming when you're going through that journey. And I say I faced it myself, and I truly get it. So for myself, I'd say, don't worry. If you're feeling bad on a given day, just close off in some ways. Go back into yourself and saying, right, just keep it very simple. These are the things you're going to try and do today. And even on the days you couldn't, just spend time with family, because there were times when I just couldn't physically or mentally sit down and revise. And I would allow myself to spend time unhinged, saying, it's okay, you can spend half an hour with the kids, play with them, do whatever you need to do. I want to unwind, and they also will feel like you're not necessarily neglecting them either. But at the same time, it's your way of saying, no, I can't do any more than this.
Yeah, it's very important to be aware of your limits and knowing when it's not a good time to revise because it might not be productive. And the best thing to do then is rest and recharge. Then next day you might be more fresh to do it. So I think it's great to see that you've managed to overcome so many challenges, and it shows a lot of resilience from yourself. Tell us, how does it feel now that you know you've passed your exam and have it behind you?
It's actually a very strange feeling, and it's, I mean, it's now nearly over a month now, and I still can't quite believe it's happened. As I say, every day I'll be like, no, I'm going to see that pass mark and I'm going to see those green letters. But actually, I wasn't convinced, as crazy it sounds. So I'm still having to say, I didn't plan beyond the exam results. And at the same time, I didn't have a plan B, thinking I'm going to sit the exam either. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did put some money aside for another attempt, because obviously it's a big exam. You can't just, put money out for it. But I didn't actually plan ahead, thinking, okay, well, actually, CC dates such and such, and all these other things I need to do for the portfolio side of things. I hadn't actually planned, because I didn't think beyond the exam day. So now I'm in a nice place to be, where I've done all the other stuff, and majority of the portfolio stuff are done, just a few things to be done. And now I'm in a nice limbo about, well, what do I do next in terms of jobs and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, so I remember when we first spoke, you mentioned to me, I really want to pass this exam, want to do it one shot and have it in the bag. And you achieve it. And that comes to the individualized effort that you put in, because yes, going for a program is great, but you had to put in the work, and you actually were quite consistent in that.
And some of the things that I did come across, in terms of revising, it's not one of those exams you can just sit and revise on your own. You do need to work with others. And the one thing that I personally struggle with is trying to find a group to revise with. And actually, looking back now, it actually became an additional benefit. And I didn't realise at the time. At the time, it was quite stressful, because I was like, why can't I find a group just to revise with? But looking back, actually, it helped me, because it was never the same set of group of people. I was picking up things from different people, and it might not work for others, and so I wouldn't recommend it. Ideally, try and find a group consistent with at least 3 members at the very least. But actually, for me, because it was never the same set of group of people, I was picking up things from others and vice versa, and actually helped understanding other people's styles of questioning, or doing things, and watching the videos as well. So having that kind of benchmark in some way, saying, okay, I know we're all different, but these are the things that you've got to try and get in, and these are the things that they might look for, helped for me to think, okay, because as a GP trainee, you have maybe at the very beginning 1 week to sit in with supervisors and work and sit with other doctors, and then that's it. You're on your own. You're flying solo in some ways most of the time, and it's only when you do your video or audio calls with your supervisors that you start to unpick some of these things. But it's only one example. It's not your every day, and it's only when you're practicing with others you're like, okay, I like how you've done that. I like how you explained that. So it was that revising that really helped with different people.
So what are you looking forward to now, Sunita?
I guess enjoying the job as it is, because I've noticed that because that stress level's automatically gone down, I'm actually finishing on time. As perverse as this, and nothing has actually genuinely changed other than that my stress levels have come down, and I'm enjoying the job more than I have done ever. So I feel like I'm able to give more to the patient in those 12, 15 minutes. And hopefully I've been asked to jump down to 10 minutes. So that's my next bit of stress, I suppose, in some ways. But it's a happy medium to be in.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience today. And I really resonate with what you said. You have to believe in yourself. And as Sunita has shown you the proof, despite ADHD, dyslexia, having to juggle family things, she still managed to prepare well and pass on her first attempt. So if you found this useful, you might find that you want to learn more about the blueprint. I'll leave a link down in the description. Thank you so much, Sunita. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.